My hubby, unaware of my $8 million assets, shouted, "I can't see pregnant as a woman. Get out." Julian's words, "You shouldn't have gotten a divorce when you were pregnant," shocked me. "Raise the kids on your own," he advised, his voice dripping with a smugness that made my blood run cold. I felt utterly alone, adrift on a sea of despair. Then a miracle occurred. I found the strength to accept the divorce, my voice barely a whisper as I said, "Okay, here are the divorce papers." 3 months later, the phone calls began, non-stop. Julian, my ex-husband, the man I'd married when I was just 27. I'm Evelyn, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. But right now, I felt anything but ordinary. I felt empowered. "Evelyn, will you support me?" Julian asked, his voice laced with desperation. He'd been my boss, a successful salesman at a large trading company. At first, I hadn't thought much of him, seeing him as a trustworthy senior colleague. But during a company party, I witnessed his true charm. He was courteous, well-liked, and enthusiastic about his work. I was captivated by his sales tactics, his effortless ability to connect with people. I, however, was shy, struggling to find my voice. Julian, on the other hand, was a natural leader. He exuded confidence and charisma, qualities that drew me in. After he was promoted to section chief, he began contacting me more frequently, his attention making my heart flutter. Our relationship blossomed, and a year later, he proposed. "I've wanted to ask you this for so long," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Evelyn, will you marry me?" My world dissolved into a blissful haze as I gazed at him, unable to speak. Simply nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. It was a dream come true. Never been in a meaningful relationship, and this felt like a fairy tale. I was so happy, so utterly in love. But my happiness was short-lived. A year after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Couldn't wait to share the news with Julian, picturing his joy. But when I told him, his reaction was chilling. "Huh? What do you mean you're pregnant?" he exclaimed, his voice laced with disgust. "Didn't you marry me to support my life? Didn't you take birth control pills?" My heart sank. It always wanted children, and I thought Julian felt the same. But his words revealed a stark reality. He saw me as a roommate, not a wife, and he never wanted children. "You made no mention of birth control," I said, my voice trembling with hurt. "I thought you'd be happy." Julian sighed, his eyes cold and distant. "You're just not getting it," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're garbage, making a huge mess of my life. You used to work for me, so you can't even pretend that acting like an adult is something you're capable of. Is your mind too devoid of substance to comprehend that?" He tapped my head with his index finger, his touch cold and accusing. "This wasn't supposed to be bad news," he said, his voice laced with anger. "Why did I even marry you? Figured you could at least take care of the housework, but here you are, opening up new things for me to take care of. Honestly, I'm thinking about filing for divorce." His words were like a physical blow. He smirked, his eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. "I was thinking about hiring a maid before I married you," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hate housework, but you seemed to enjoy me, didn't you? You never disregarded my advice, and I'd heard you were good at housework. I thought we would both benefit from it. Seems you deceived me." His words were a venomous attack, each syllable laced with poison. I bit my lip, trying to stifle the sobs that threatened to break free. I never wanted children with him. Who had asked me to get pregnant? It was common sense to take birth control. I felt a deep, agonizing regret for ever marrying him. Get an abortion, he demanded, his voice cold and hard. I refused, my body trembling with defiance. I had no choice but to follow his instructions until I could figure out how to support myself. With tears streaming down my face, I pleaded with him for the sake of our child. I stayed by his side, not as a wife, but as a roommate, a mere shadow of a woman. I'll pay, he said, his voice cold and unfeeling. But I won't give the child any care at all. You're on your own with it. His words were a dagger to my heart. I had become a burden, a responsibility he was eager to shed. After our divorce, I resigned from my job at his request. I couldn't face him every day, couldn't bear the thought of encountering his cold, judgmental gaze. I had to start over, rebuild my life, find a new job, a new sense of purpose. I'll work outdoors if you properly maintain the house, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You only have to take care of the housework. Even while we were dating, I knew he wasn't good at housework, but I foolishly believed he was depending on me. Maybe that was one of his motivations for wanting to marry me. But now I was trapped in a nightmare, his emotional abuse, a constant shadow hanging over my life. And then the news that shattered my world. My parents had passed away. I had only been able to see them once a year after I married Julian, allowed a mere 3 days back home when he was away on business trips. He made it clear that I couldn't leave him, his self-serving remarks like a constant reminder of my dependence on him. You leave the house, what am I supposed to eat? He'd whine, his words laced with resentment. The only filial responsibility I could provide was to report about my child, but even that was taken away from me. Felt like I had reached the lowest point in my life. Then an email arrived from an unknown address. I opened it with trepidation, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, I found a photograph and a phone number, along with the words, "If you read this letter, please contact me anytime." The photo was proof that the letter was authentic. Agreed to meet them, my voice choked with tears as I poured out my heart to them over the phone. You want to see your family members. Considering your living situation, how are you so self-centered? What about the food I was eating? Julian's voice boomed, his words laced with venom. Please, I have to handle my parents' business. Follow the necessary steps, I pleaded. I've told them enough about our child. They just want to see me once, please. I can't afford to pay for your outings, he sneered. If you go, pay with your own money. His words were like icy daggers, but I was numb to his cruelty. My heart was shattered, my spirit broken. But then Julian, who was usually so rigid and controlling, seemed to soften. Hold on, he said, his voice strangely subdued. I just realized I have to go on a business trip. You can spend around 3 days at home. Just be sure to return before I do. This was unusual. Julian never gave me this much leeway. Later, it would become clear why this unusual forbearance was being extended. With Julian's permission, I returned to my hometown and met the letter sender. They were my maternal grandparents, my grandma Japanese, and my grandfather American. My mother, fascinated by Japanese culture, had traveled to Japan for her undergraduate studies, where she met my father. Their marriage, however, was not widely acknowledged. My parents opposed the union, fervently wanting her to remain in America. The couple fled together, unable to return to Japan until they received the tragic news of their deaths. We had forgiven them long ago, but we were unsure how to deal with them. I truly feel bad for being such an obstinate fool, my grandma Cora said, her voice filled with regret. I would have been happy for them to be married if I had known this would happen. When my grandparents' acquaintance informed them of my parents' passing, they were devastated, filled with remorse. They held themselves responsible for my parents' demise, and they had heard about me, their grandson. We know it may be difficult for you to accept us, given what we did to your parents, my grandma said, her voice soft and gentle. But know that we are always on your side. Do not be afraid to seek help if you need it at all. I swear to keep you safe, no matter what. Never assume you're alone when things get hard, please. Her words, filled with warmth and reassurance, pierced the numbness that had enveloped my heart. After fighting so hard to protect the child within me, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. My grandparents, shocked to see me crying, gently asked what had happened. When they learned about my current predicament, they were furious. "This is not the life you have to live anymore," my grandpa said, his voice firm and resolute. "We'll support you. You just have to worry about yourself and the child. Put money worries aside. Observe self-care." Their words, filled with unwavering support, gave me the strength to file for divorce. I vowed to get even with Julian, but he moved first. When I returned home, he was waiting for me. His face contorted with rage, the letter from my grandparents clutched in his hand. "What is this letter?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury. "You went through my desk without agreement. This is my home. I'm free to do what I choose, even if it's your house. There's something called privacy. How are you feeling today?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. "Talking back to me in that way makes you appear different." He was so quick to sense even the slightest shift in me. But it didn't matter if he had read the letter. There was nothing wrong with it. Simply stated that my grandparents existed. Yet Julian used the letter as a pretext for divorce. "I think you made up the story in the letter about meeting this elderly man and woman," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Did you return to your hometown to go on a date with a man? You can't possibly mislead me with such stupid deception. I am aware that you have been having fun behind my back by utilizing the internet or some other technique. You're a liar." "Hold on a second," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "How did you reach that judgment? You are the one who knows best that I don't have time for anything like that." He ignored my protests, his mind consumed by his own warped reality. "That's something you've never done before," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you really believe that a falsehood this blatant can fool may never undervalue me?" He was trying to trap me, to twist my words, to make me seem like the villain. I was uncomfortable with him, sensing his desperation. "I'm let down by you, not that I had high hopes in the first place," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "What then?" At this stage, one would normally show proof of their innocence, demonstrate the ridiculousness of Julian's claims. But my thoughts, as someone considering divorce, were different. I purposefully allowed Julian to continue, wanting him to say what came next. "Let's part ways," he said, his voice cold and detached. "Our marriage was essentially based on shared interests. You've become ugly and overweight. Take care of the children yourself. No longer desire any interaction with you." He had achieved his goal. I handed him the divorce papers he had left behind. "Absolutely. Here are the divorce papers," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sign them, and before you decide otherwise, I'll take them tomorrow." "Why do you have this?" he asked, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "I will take care of your residence. Finding something like this and cleaning the house are two easy tasks." It was a lie. I had long since seen the divorce papers he had placed on his desk, a constant reminder of his power over me. He subtly implied that he could get rid of me at any time, ensuring that I would always be afraid of him, never daring to hurt him again. I was terrified of that one piece of paper, its power over me suffocating. You suddenly have a lot of confidence, he said, his voice laced with a bitter sarcasm. Can you truly exist without me, having no life skills? Don't underestimate me. Will no longer rely on someone such as yourself. I will use all of my might to keep my child safe. It was a gamble. Inside, I was nervous, wondering what would happen if Julian saw that I had suddenly become brave. But I had a suspicion as to why Julian was bringing up the divorce now. Understood that he would not back down from his divorce proposal, and this was also a win-win situation for him. Oh my goodness, if you have such an attitude, then bring up that child by yourself, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. As we are separating amicably, I will not be interacting with you or the child in any way. I never see that kid, and I don't want you anywhere near me. Got it? All right. This concludes our conversation. And so, I divorced Julian when I was around 9 months pregnant. I packed up my belongings and left his place, my heart heavy with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I had some funds from my years of being alone, enough to get me started. I went to my grandparents' house to take care of some business, and later I gave birth to my first child, a healthy boy. I named him Henry, hoping for a future filled with joy and strength. My son grew up quickly, and his grandparents and I cherished watching him grow and thrive. 3 months later, my phone rang. An unknown number. My stomach twisted with apprehension. What in the world is happening? I asked, my voice tense. I was about to hang up, but the voice on the other end was high-pitched and trembling. I thought it was a woman at first. But then I recognized the voice, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to hang up, to erase the sound of his voice from my memory. You founded the business, he said, his voice dripping with accusation. I haven't heard of this before. During our marriage, where did you acquire that lot of money? That money belongs to me. Return it immediately, you cunning lady. His words were a venomous attack, his voice filled with a desperate rage. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to remain calm. Well, why do you think this is a scam? I asked, my voice cool and collected. There isn't any proof that I took your money. Stop talking, you liar, he said, his voice rising in fury. You likely stole extra money from me to cover your living expenses in secret. Even if that were the case, I could never have saved up enough money to launch a business. A month's worth of spending was hardly covered by the living expenses. Don't act absurd. How did you obtain so much money then, when you were jobless and living with me? He demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. No employment could have provided you with that kind of money. You just were unaware of my possessions. I had $1.1 million just before our split. How come? Julian's voice faltered, his words betraying his shock. He was caught off guard, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. What is your source of income? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The elderly couple I described are the grandparents' calm. They are the proprietors of a well-known computer software business worldwide. I met them before our divorce, and they gave me a bank book with the money they had been saving for me. They consistently save money for their prospective grandchild. Julian was speechless, his face a mask of disbelief. I continued, my voice gaining confidence. I changed the account's name right away following the divorce. As my grandparents were traveling from a far-off place, I had to move swiftly to make sure everything went as well as possible. Thank goodness the money was available to me the day they landed in Japan, because the name change was finished that day. I didn't know my grandparents had funds since my parents had told me they had died when I was a little child. When they discovered the money, I assumed they had been duped. They probably didn't say anything because they thought it would help me. My grandparents got in touch with me when my parents passed away, found out about my circumstances, and made the decision to help as soon as they realized the true reasons for the divorce. They pledged to support me. Julian was enraged, his voice filled with a desperate fury. "I wouldn't have divorced you if I knew this," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You have a lot of nerve not to try to comprehend my circumstances." "That's because you're terrible at explaining things," I retorted, my voice laced with a quiet satisfaction. "Is that the reason you and your new wife quarrel all the time, always putting the blame somewhere else?" Julian's response was desperate, his words filled with a desperate need to regain control. "You expect me to miss it?" We collaborated. I didn't have to do any research. I now realize the secret. Rest certain, though, that I am very relieved that you will wed the vice president's daughter. I no longer have to deal with you, and there's no chance that we will remarry. "You don't have to be that strict," I said, my voice laced with a dry sarcasm. "We had once been in love. Is it not possible for us to make amends?" "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "I'm not even trying to understand what you're saying. I want to get back together with you." "But who said that?" I asked, my voice filled with a cold indifference. After our divorce, I felt a sense of liberation, a newfound freedom. My grandparents had been incredibly generous to me and my child. I had finally found happiness, a life filled with love and purpose. "Give your crap to your wife to handle," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I want no contact with you at all." Julian winced, realizing that I was no longer the vulnerable woman he had once manipulated. He tried a new tactic, his voice pleading. "Well, could you offer me some money? With the high-maintenance demands of my new wife, I hardly have any money left over for spending. She goes out virtually every night, is demanding, and does not perform housekeeping correctly. I assume you have $1 million. Would you please give me some?" "Avoid being absurd," I said, my voice laced with a cold disdain. "I have spent every last dime on you. Give up requesting money for your own convenience." Julian was taken aback by my response, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I established my business and purchased a new home with all of the money I have. I have used up all of my $1.1 million. I apologize, but I am unable to assist you." I had anticipated Julian's attempt to manipulate me, knowing his selfish character. As soon as he found out about my predicament, he would come begging for money. I had promptly moved my money into fixed assets, a self-defense measure to enable single moms to live freely. I established a nursing home with a nursery, using the majority of the funds. I purchased a new home, a safe haven for myself and my son. The service gained a lot of popularity and positive feedback from mothers facing similar circumstances. I did extensive research, used social media, and spoke with my grandparents for guidance on the company's processes and website to learn what was required of single parents in the job to meet these demands. I had built my own business, a testament to my strength and resilience. "I can't believe you're running such a successful business," Julian said, his voice dripping with a mixture of disbelief and resentment. "It always annoyed me so much when you had a condescending manner," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I can now tell you that while you felt you could do anything and that I was garbage, you were incredibly mistaken. For the rest of your life, I hope you will regret abandoning me," he said, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "Your absence won't change anything." I retorted, "Evelyn, hold on, please. Give us another opportunity. They'll bend down, clean your house, do everything you want. Are you kidding? Even if it meant losing you, I would never get back together. Please, never come to inform my kid that you are his father." Instead, have a happy life with your current spouse." Julian was still yelling when I immediately cut him off and blocked his number. I updated my phone number as well. My grandparents, concerned for my safety, offered to buy me a bodyguard and set up security cameras at my house. I smiled at their protective gesture, even though I felt embarrassed by Julian's actions. Julian's relationship with the CEO's daughter did not work out well. He was allegedly controlled and cheated out of his pay, according to reports from former co-workers. His position at work declined as rumors about him proliferated, and he developed a reputation for being unfaithful. He was supposedly living a difficult and restricted life, unable to quit since he was the son-in-law of the CEO. Co-workers would make jokes about his situation, and I couldn't help but laugh along with them. I was finally able to live a peaceful life, filled with the love of my grandparents and my son. As his 9th birthday approached, I told him everything about Julian. I wanted him to know the truth, to understand the challenges we had overcome. "I'll always stay by your side, Mommy," he said, his voice filled with love and loyalty. His words brought me joy, a reminder of the strength and resilience I had found within myself. I had overcome adversity, built a life filled with love and purpose, and found a happiness I never thought possible. I had emerged from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever before. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome stories like this. Stay blessed and healthy. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.